And again, this is typically a 90-minute workshop, and it builds upon the second one as well. So I want you to see how each builds upon another, but I do want to ask a question. Few people can share out, but think back. It could be your current role, it could be a past role. What was your first day like? Think back to the onboarding process that you experienced. See some smiles, see some very deep thought. Who would like to share that experience? And again, you don't have to say if it's your current role, if it's last. What was that onboarding experience like?
In one company that I went to, they put me in a room and they said, okay, for the next 3 days, you have to fill out paperwork, and after that, then you get to watch, I'm sorry, I should know better. You get to fill out paperwork, and after that, then you got to watch 3 days effectively of videos for all of our safety training and manufacturing processes. And so for the first 3 days was sitting in a room, isolated by myself. Occasionally somebody would come in and make sure I wasn't asleep, and filling out paperwork and watching videos. That sounds like a personal problem.
So first 3 days with your experience in this new role, this organization, you're by yourself, you're with videos and paperwork. Anyone else? Yeah.
I had a good and a bad experience. So the good experience was from the whole company perspective. We had a 3-day orientation where we were with all other new people, covered like the purpose, the creed, that, all that kind of stuff. It was great. I'm still in contact with the people that I spent that first couple of days.
Re-say that again, just so we can get
Okay. Good and bad experience at the same place. So
At the same company?
The same company.
Okay.
So from the good perspective, the first 3 days they did a company-wide orientation. So you were in the same room with the same people, kind of covering everything from benefits to the purpose and the creed and all that kind of stuff. But when I left there to go to my actual job, I got put, my new supervisor was on vacation for 2 weeks, so she wasn't there to talk to me. I got put in a room. There was a whole big file drawer, and I was told that anything I needed, or I should orientate myself to what's in those files, because that would tell me what to do on my new job. So I basically spent the first couple of weeks just not being very productive, let's put it that. I mean, what do you do? So anyway, that's my good and bad.
Yep. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that a lot of us are having those same experiences of both those very negative and almost, traumatizing experiences of just kind of being thrown in, sink or swim kind of feelings, but then also those good feelings of having a structured onboarding process to make you feel engaged from the very beginning. And that's where focusing on skills helps us create those structured onboarding processes so that you can have that engagement and understanding of what that person is responsible day one, knowing what that skill level they're at to then get them to full potential where everyone is on the same page. So again, real quick, it's just that 4-part series, the SHRM certified, it's a 90-minute, and that's where we're working with those that already work with employers, so the Work One centers, chambers of commerce, economic development, to host these workshops that I'm giving you the super quick preview to. With the selection and onboarding workshop, the objectives are to understand how, and to a couple of the questions and notes before, how to use skills to do both that selection and onboarding process. In that workshop, we create guidelines, and I'll give you a couple examples in a minute, but you put together draft potential onboarding plans so that we can, alleviate some of those negative experiences that the majority of us have probably experienced in some way. We always go back to the approach when we're talking about selection and onboarding, because it truly is building upon how we're describing the opportunities, then how are we interviewing and screening out those individuals based on the competencies so that we can select the individual that has the talents and competencies that you need for someone to be successful in that role. And then we can make sure that everybody is taking that same approach so that we're eliminating those biases as much as possible. The statistic I'll point out on this slide is that a lot of times when we work with employers, we're like, this sounds like a lot. It's changing a lot of processes, organizational change. Definitely. A lot of times, like, this is going to add to my time to hire. Like, this is going to take a longer amount of time for me to really get this into place. And what research has showed is that Burning Glass found that when you remove degree requirements, you're actually able to hire faster because the people that are applying to your job are more aligned to the opportunities, and then you're selecting them based on the same language, based on the competencies. And we always look to that onboarding piece, that green graphic of when the Healthcare Policy and Finance Department in Colorado implemented skills-based approaches. It took them about 5 to 6 months to get their call center representatives up to speed. And when they were focused on where those people were coming in on those competencies, they were able to get them up to speed within 1 to 2 weeks. So that's reducing a ton of time. People were to full productivity, and that's a cost savings, which is, that statistic alone always astounds me, that we're thinking of, this is going to take more time. How can we really get skills-based approach into action? And that there are true benefits to employers with taking this approach. I'm going to go through this quick because I want to try to make up some of the time if I can. But the main difference between taking a skills-based approach is that you're evaluating these individuals based on the skills and what that position expectations are. And since we're using clear guidelines, every single score has a definition. By doing that, we're all scoring in the same way. A 1 between all 5 of the hiring managers or those that are involved in the interviewing process are on the same page. And then if there are discrepancies that come to light through the conversations and the scoring, that's when you can have some really deep conversations that inform, are we asking the right things, or is there a skills gap in the market? Then you're able to really position yourself of then how you're onboarding and what training you are able to provide. This is a nod to the skills-based job posting that we use in 101 and build upon throughout the entire series. How we organize job posting is with required competencies and preferred competencies. Required competencies are the skills that you need day one. And if that individual doesn't have those skills, not that a certain skill level, but do they have this competency, then that's where you would eliminate candidates. Preferred competencies help understand, well, what can I train to? What competencies would be helpful for me to have a competitive advantage? And then understanding where you could continue to train to during that onboarding piece. I'm going to nod to the very bottom one, the persuasion competency. Persuade strong candidates to apply to our position and join our team. This, again, we're taking the recruiter role as an example throughout the entire series. In 102, we use that evaluation and we build to for that competency. How are we going to assess for that one competency? So each competency, we have interview questions we're scoring to so that we can understand what level are these individuals coming in for each competency. A couple examples that we use within the workshops, you could have someone write a sample email or LinkedIn message for a recruiter to attract individuals to your company. Through that sample, you're able to then assess what level do they have this skill, and at what level are they coming in at. This helps you then build the scoring guidelines for that role, for each competency. We use the 1-3-5 just to fit it in one slide, but through the workshops we also look to defining how are we describing the 2 and 4. So again, this is where that consistency of the guidelines of how we're scoring each individual helps reduce those biases because we're all defining the competency in the same way, we're all scoring in the same way, and then identifying what we really need as a minimum requirement for each competency. That's when you can understand if you can skill up an individual, or if for your company needs, you don't have the time to train, then you're at least able to have those informative conversations. a quick visual of just what this looks like of defining each competency. We added writing, so you can, again, we want you to define writing that's applicable to your role. That writing for a recruiter is going to be different than writing for another occupation. So whatever, you can give that insight into how your company works and what benefits that individual could either bring to the table and add to. A little less than 10 minutes, so I want to just share like why we're taking this approach. We're obviously wanting to assess candidates in the same way. And this is to a question too of like, how are we really eliminating biases? Throughout all of our workshops, again, we like to connect tools and resources so you can truly get skills-based practices into action. And biasinterrupters.org is a wonderful resource. It's not our tool, it's just a resource that we're aware of and work closely with to consider and to keep in mind, how are we continuously reducing biases so that all individuals can see themselves, that all individuals that are qualified for the position can see themselves in the role. And of course, it's creating that consistency. And again, it's identifying if nobody is meeting our minimum requirement for persuasion, is our minimum requirement really what we need? Or is this a skills gap that the market is saying that we don't have this skill, we don't have the certifications, the MIG skills that are in our community. So how do we come together to address that market need? Going quickly through how we're doing that selection process. I'm gonna go through this quicker than probably you want. So again, would love to talk more about this afterwards. But how we define, this builds upon, again, how we're organizing the job posting. So remember, we had those required competencies and preferred competencies. We use this matrix to help them define what those required competencies are. So again, those are the ones that you need day one to a minimum skill set. So if an individual doesn't have that minimum requirement in these required competencies, you're eliminating them within your process. Within that screening, interviewing, they're not someone that you can train. We also define preferred competencies because there are competitive needs, helpful or competencies that an individual might have that could add to this role. So we want to be mindful of all competencies that an individual could have and bring to the value for your company. And these preferred competencies on the bottom half of the quadrants are helpful, but not necessarily needed core functions for that role. But we also want to make sure that we are including those competencies that we can train to, but it's not necessarily needed day one. And again, that's going to be different for every organization, every company. So that's where this tailoring for your specific needs is so important. And this is really where that onboarding piece comes in. That you understand what skill level an individual comes in at, and then how do you get them to where you need them to be. And in that process, you're able to identify what those skills gaps are. So you've defined the competencies, you've created those scoring guidelines, you're able to build out an assessment that is specific to your company needs, and then you're able to identify where those skills gaps are so that the training is impactful and targeted to exactly, again, what you need, not just training for the sake of training, right? That's, again, time, cost, and maybe an excess of what is really needed. And then that's how onboarding, that those poor experiences that we've shared of, it's the paperwork and heavy administrative focus, that with skills-based approach, you have that employee engaged from day one, which is only going to build into your retention strategy. And it ensures that the individual is getting what they need to be successful in that role. And again, feeds back to them being able to get up to full potential quicker and feel engaged within your organization. I'm going to put all of this up just for the purposes of a visual. Within the 103 workshop, we work with your individual role, your individual companies to start drafting, well, what does this look like? Where you really focus on those required competencies, interview assessment, recruitment software, and so forth, of making sure that we're prioritizing that those required competencies, what you need at day one, gets attention first. And what does that look like? Again, this is for a recruiter role, but if you have a machine technician, what do they need to know? What are those competencies first that they need to be successful in the role? And then how do you build out an onboarding piece to make sure that you understand where they came in at, and then where do you need them to be? And then establishing those check-ins so that you're able to, again, assess that skill level. And then if additional training is needed, you're aware. If not, then you're good to go. Without that, we don't always have our finger on the pulse of where our employees are at and then how we can really get them to be full productivity. And there's more research. We can connect all of these research points to you, of course. It's a good point that I always want to make is that skills gaps can cost your companies a lot of money. On average, it's $800,000 a year. So when we think of, do we have the time to do this? It's like, we do not have the time not to. We are losing a lot of time and money and resources, and that employee engagement piece is so critical because, like you said, it's a competitive market right now. So we need to be able to both understand where our individuals are coming in at, and then how do we keep them. So again, so quick. We're always happy to help think through really what a skills-based approach is. I'm going to do a little bit of shout out. Brooklyn is part of one of our Skillful Coaching Core members. So again, we're really trying to work with those that are already in the community, and that you have peers and resources already here in West Lafayette, Region 4, the state of Indiana. So we're here to help support you in any way and let us know how we can help. Thanks.